In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like cosmic tides, there exists a universal truth that has echoed through the stars for millennia. Never judge a species by their appearance, their technology, or their seemingly primitive ways. For in the darkest corners of space, where hope seems lost and defeat appears certain, sometimes the most unexpected heroes emerge. This is the story of Marcus Chun, a simple maintenance worker aboard a failing cargo vessel, whose quiet demeanor and unremarkable appearance masked something that would shake the very foundations of an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. It's a tale of how the greatest predator in the known universe wore the face of a humble janitor, and how the most feared warriors in existence learned too late that humanity's greatest strength was never their technology or their numbers, but their refusal to surrender when everything seemed lost. What happens when a galactic empire built on conquest and domination encounters a species that views extinction as merely another problem to solve? What occurs when beings who have never known defeat meet creatures who have made an art form of turning hopeless situations into victory? The Zephyrian Empire was about to find out. Marcus Chun moved through the corridors of the cargo vessel Prosperity's Dream with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent the better part of 3 years maintaining every bolt, wire, and life support system aboard the aging ship. His worn coveralls bore the stains of countless repairs, and his hands carried the permanent marks of someone who worked with machinery for a living. To anyone watching, he appeared to be exactly what his employment records claimed, a quiet human maintenance worker who kept his head down and did his job without complaint. The other crew members barely noticed him. Captain Vextar, a massive Corellian with 4 arms and an ego to match, treated Marcus like a piece of equipment that occasionally needed feeding. The Zenithian navigator, Sylvan, with her crystalline features and superior attitude, looked through him as if he were transparent. Even the cargo handlers, mostly brackery with their thick hides and simple minds, paid him no attention beyond the occasional grunt when he fixed something they had broken. This suited Marcus perfectly. The Prosperity's Dream was a legitimate cargo hauler, but like many ships operating in the Outer Rim territories, it supplemented its income with less legal activities. Captain Vextar had connections with smugglers, pirates, and occasionally served as a drop ship for the Resistance movements that constantly bubbled up against Zephyrian rule. Marcus had signed on 6 months ago when the ship docked at Terra Station, claiming he needed work and could fix anything with moving parts. What he hadn't mentioned was that he was a decorated veteran of the Human Resistance Navy, a former Special Operations commander who had spent 8 years fighting a guerrilla war against Zephyrian expansion forces. He also hadn't mentioned that his real name wasn't Marcus Chun, or that he was currently on a deep cover mission that had taken him 2 years to set up. The Zephyrians have been expanding their empire for over 10 millennia, absorbing or destroying every species they encountered. They were master tacticians, superior warriors, and possessed technology that made most other civilizations look primitive by comparison. Their massive warships could devastate entire planets. Their ground forces were nearly unstoppable, and their intelligence network reached into every corner of the galaxy. What they lacked was imagination. The Zephyrians had conquered through overwhelming force and superior technology for so long that they had forgotten how to fight an enemy that refused to meet them on conventional terms. When humanity had refused to surrender after their first colony worlds were destroyed, the Zephyrians had been puzzled. When human survivors had begun conducting asymmetric warfare, hitting supply lines and communication networks instead of military targets, the Zephyrians had been frustrated. When entire human populations had seemingly vanished into the void, only to reappear months later conducting raids on Zephyrian installations, the Empire had begun to take notice. Now, Marcus was conducting the deepest intelligence-gathering operation in human history, and he was doing it by pretending to be exactly what the Zephyrians expected humans to be: weak, compliant, and utterly beneath notice. The ship's proximity alarm began blaring, yanking Marcus from his thoughts. Through the maintenance tunnels that ran between the ship's inner and outer hulls, He could hear Captain Vextar shouting orders in his native language. Marcus set down his tools and made his way to the nearest access panel, where he could monitor the ship's communications without being seen. Zephyrian patrol ships. Sylvan's crystalline voice carried clearly through the ship's comm system. 3 heavy destroyers, closing fast. They're running a full spectrum scan. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The Prosperity's Dream was carrying more than just legitimate cargo. Hidden in specially shielded compartments throughout the ship were weapons, medical supplies, and intelligence data destined for resistance cells on 6 different worlds. If the Zephyrians discovered the contraband, everyone aboard would face immediate execution. Can we outrun them? Vextar demanded. Not in this rust bucket, came the harsh reply from the engine room. The hyperdrive motivator is running at 60% efficiency, and we've got a plasma leak in the starboard nacelle. We might get half a light year before they catch us. Marcus closed his eyes and accessed the ship's diagnostic systems through his maintenance interface. The Brackery engineer was right about the hyperdrive, but he was wrong about the plasma leak. Marcus had created that leak 3 days ago, along with 17 other minor malfunctions throughout the ship. To any casual observer, the Prosperity's Dream appeared to be a failing cargo vessel barely holding together. In reality, Marcus had been carefully sabotaging non-critical systems to create the perfect cover identity. The plasma leak could be fixed in under 5 minutes. The hyperdrive efficiency could be restored to 95% in less than an hour. The question was whether doing so would blow his cover. Through his monitoring equipment, Marcus watched as 3 massive Zephyrian destroyers closed in on their position. Each ship was over 1 kilometer long, bristling with weapons and carrying enough firepower to reduce a small moon to rubble. Their hulls gleamed with the distinctive blue-black metal that made Zephyrian ships nearly indestructible, and their sensor arrays could detect a single biological signature from 50,000 kilometers away. "They're hailing us," Sylvan reported, her voice tight with fear. The main view screen activated, revealing the bridge of the lead destroyer. Commander Thane Tick stood before them, his 7-foot frame covered in the ritual scars that marked him as a veteran of 100 conquests. His 4 eyes fixed on Captain Vextar with the cold calculation of a predator examining prey. Cargo vessel Prosperity's Dream. The Zephyrian's voice carried the authority of absolute power. You will submit to immediate boarding and inspection. Any resistance will result in your immediate destruction. Vextar's 4 hands worked frantically at his control console. Acknowledged, Commander. We're powering down engines and preparing to receive your boarding party. Wise choice, Thane Tick replied. Be aware that we are conducting enhanced security sweeps in this sector. Any illegal contraband will be met with severe punishment. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Marcus could hear Vextar cursing in 3 different languages while Sylvan ran damage control calculations. In the cargo bay, the Brackery workers were probably already sweating through their thick hides, knowing that Zephyrian inspections often ended with someone being spaced for minor infractions. Marcus made his decision. He crawled through the maintenance tunnels to the engine section, where he could access the ship's primary systems without being observed. His fingers moved with practiced precision as he rerouted power conduits and activated hidden subroutines he had installed over the past 6 months. To anyone monitoring the ship's systems, it would appear that the aging vessel was suffering from cascade failures in multiple subsystems. In reality, Marcus was preparing to demonstrate why humans had become such a persistent problem for the Zephyrian Empire. 20 minutes later, the first Zephyrian boarding shuttle attached itself to the Prosperity's Dream's main airlock. The shuttle disgorged 12 warriors in full combat armor, their weapons scanning for threats as they moved through the ship with the confidence of an apex predator entering a prey animal's den. Marcus watched from his hiding place in the maintenance section as the boarding party spread out through the vessel. They moved with perfect military precision, their enhanced armor providing them with complete sensor coverage of their environment. Each warrior stood nearly 8 feet tall and carried enough firepower to level a small building. Their leader, a senior commander named Zaxthan, had personally overseen the subjugation of 14 different worlds. What none of them realized was that they were walking through a trap that had been 2 years in the making. Marcus had spent months studying Zephyrian boarding procedures, analyzing their tactical doctrines, and identifying the weaknesses in their seemingly perfect military machine. He had learned that Zephyrians relied heavily on their technological superiority, rarely considering that a supposedly primitive species might be capable of turning that technology against them. The boarding party reached the cargo bay and began their inspection. Hidden sensors throughout the ship fed Marcus real-time information about their movements, their equipment status, and their communications protocols. He watched as they discovered the obvious contraband that Vextar had left for them to find, a small cache of outdated weapons, and some minor medical supplies that would result in fines rather than executions. While the warriors were distracted by this decoy, Marcus activated the first phase of his plan. Throughout the ship, hidden electromagnetic pulse generators that he had built into the maintenance systems came online. The pulses were precisely calibrated to interfere with Zephyrian armor systems without triggering their automatic defense protocols. To the warriors, it would feel like minor equipment malfunctions brought on by the ship's aging electrical systems. One by one, the boarding party's advanced sensors began to develop blind spots. Their communication systems started experiencing intermittent static. Their targeting systems suffered from minute timing delays that would be imperceptible in normal combat, but potentially fatal against an opponent who understood exactly how to exploit them. Marcus had turned the entire ship into a weapon, and the Zephyrians didn't even realize they were under attack. Senior Commander Zaxthan frowned as his helmet display flickered for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. The interference was minor, probably caused by the civilian ship's poorly maintained electrical systems, but it was annoying. He made a mental note to have his technical staff run full diagnostics on his squad's equipment when they returned to the destroyer. "Sir," one of his warriors reported, "we've completed the cargo bay inspection. Nothing beyond the minor contraband we expected. What about the crew quarters and engineering sections?" "Standard sweep complete. The ship appears to be exactly what it claims to be. A failing cargo hauler with a crew of bottom feeders trying to make a living on the rim." Zaxthan nodded. He had conducted hundreds of these inspections, and they were all the same. The outer rim was filled with ships like this one, crewed by species too weak or cowardly to be worth the Empire's attention. The fact that some of them occasionally tried to smuggle contraband was almost amusing. "What about the maintenance worker?" another warrior asked. "Scans show a human male in the engineering section." "Leave him," Zaxthan replied with dismissive contempt. "Humans are barely worth the ammunition it would take to execute them. As long as he stays in his hole and keeps his mouth shut, he poses no threat." In his hiding place, Marcus smiled coldly. That attitude was exactly what he had been counting on. The boarding party completed their inspection and returned to their shuttle, taking the decoy contraband and imposing a minor fine that would empty the ship's operating account, but leave the crew alive. As the shuttle detached and the destroyers moved on to their next target, the crew of the Prosperity's Dream breathed a collective sigh of relief. They had no idea that their humble maintenance worker had just demonstrated why humanity had become the Zephyrian Empire's most persistent nightmare. Marcus returned to his quarters and activated a hidden communication array built into what appeared to be a spare parts storage locker. The signal was encoded using quantum encryption and bounced through 17 relay stations before reaching its destination, a hidden base in the Terran Resistance Network. Ghost Fox to Central Command, he transmitted using his operational call sign. "Package delivery successful. Target acquired additional intelligence on Class 7 boarding procedures. Recommend immediate dissemination to all field units." The response came back within minutes. "Confirmed, Ghost Fox. Excellent work. Proceed to Phase 2 when ready." Marcus shut down the communication array and began planning his next move. The Zephyrians thought they had dealt with another minor smuggling operation, but what they had actually done was provide him with detailed scans of their destroyer configurations tactical deployment patterns, and command protocols. More importantly, they had confirmed something that Marcus had suspected for months. The Zephyrians were so confident in their superiority that they had become dangerously complacent. They expected their enemies to fight like civilized warriors, with honor and conventional tactics. They had never encountered anything like humanity's approach to warfare, which viewed honor as a luxury that extinct species couldn't afford. As the Prosperity's dream resumed course for its next destination, Marcus returned to his maintenance duties, once again becoming the invisible human worker that no one noticed or cared about. But now he carried with him intelligence that would help the Resistance plan operations against Zephyrian forces throughout the sector. The Empire had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years through overwhelming strength and technological superiority. But they were about to learn that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their numbers. It was their willingness to be underestimated. 3 weeks after the Zephyrian inspection, the Prosperity's dream docked at Kepler Station, a massive trading hub that served as the economic heart of the Outer Rim territories. The station sprawled across 50 kilometers of space, its rotating sections housing over 2 million beings from dozens of different species. It was also one of the most heavily surveilled locations in the galaxy, with Zephyrian intelligence operatives monitoring every transaction, conversation, and data transfer. Marcus had been looking forward to this stop for months. As the ship settled into its assigned berth, Captain Vextar gathered the crew for their standard Liberty briefing. The Corellian's 4 arms gestured emphatically as he outlined the schedule for cargo loading, system maintenance, and shore leave. Most of the crew would have 48 hours of free time to spend their wages on the station's entertainment district. Remember, Vextar concluded, his voice carrying the weight of hard experience, this is Zephyrian space. Keep your heads down, pay your taxes, and don't give the authorities any reason to take a closer look at our operation. The last thing we need is another surprise inspection. Marcus nodded along with the rest of the crew, maintaining the facade of a simple maintenance worker grateful for a chance to spend some of his modest wages on real food and cheap entertainment. In reality, he was preparing to execute the most dangerous phase of his mission. Kepler Station's central hub contained the regional headquarters of the Zephyrian Intelligence Service, a fortress-like structure that monitored communications and coordinated security operations across 17 star systems. The facility was considered impregnable, defended by automated weapon systems, energy shields, and a garrison of elite warriors. No one had ever successfully penetrated its security. Marcus intended to walk through the front door. 6 hours later, he made his way through the station's lower levels, dressed in the maintenance coveralls that had become his second skin. He carried a standard repair kit and moved with the unhurried pace of someone responding to a routine work order. The corridors were filled with beings from across the galaxy, but Marcus blended into the background noise of station life. The Zephyrian Intelligence Facility occupied the station's most secure section, accessible only through multiple security checkpoints and biometric scanners. As Marcus approached the first checkpoint, he felt the familiar calm that had sustained him through countless dangerous missions. Fear was a luxury he couldn't afford, and doubt was a poison that killed more operatives than enemy fire. Work order, he told the Brackery guard at the checkpoint, producing a perfectly forged maintenance request. Atmospheric recycling system in Section C7 is showing pressure fluctuations. The guard barely glanced at the paperwork before waving him through. To most species, humans looked essentially identical, and their reputation for competent but unremarkable technical work made them ideal for jobs that required access to sensitive areas without drawing attention. Marcus passed through 3 more checkpoints, each time presenting documentation that identified him as a contract maintenance worker assigned to repair aging life support systems. The forgeries were perfect because they weren't actually forgeries. Marcus had spent months infiltrating the station's administrative systems, creating a complete alternate identity for himself within the maintenance scheduling database. According to the official records, Mark Chen had been working routine maintenance contracts on Kepler Station for over a year. His performance reviews were satisfactory, but unremarkable. His security clearance was appropriate for his duties, and his psychological profile indicated a compliant personality with no political interests or dangerous associations. The final checkpoint was manned by a Zephyrian warrior in full combat armor. As Marcus approached, sophisticated scanners analyzed his biometrics, cross-referenced his identity against security databases, and confirmed his authorization to be in the secure section. The warrior's four eyes fixed on Marcus with the casual contempt that characterized Zephyrian attitudes towards supposedly inferior species. "State your business," the warrior demanded in heavily accented standard. "Atmospheric recycling maintenance, sir," Marcus replied, keeping his voice appropriately deferential. "System's been acting up for the past few days. Probably just needs a filter replacement and pressure calibration." The warrior studied Marcus's work order, comparing it against information displayed on his helmet's internal screens. Everything matched perfectly because Marcus had ensured it would. He had learned long ago that the best way to infiltrate an enemy facility was to become indistinguishable from the legitimate personnel who worked there every day. "Proceed," the warrior commanded. "Complete your work and report to security when finished." Marcus nodded respectfully and entered the intelligence facility's maintenance sector. Once inside, he made his way to the atmospheric processing center, where he actually began working on the recycling system. The pressure fluctuations he had reported were real because he had caused them 3 days earlier during a previous visit. Any monitoring systems would observe him performing exactly the maintenance work his documentation claimed he was there to do. While his hands worked on routine repairs, Marcus's enhanced retinal implants were recording everything around him. The implants were undetectable by conventional scanning technology and could store terabytes of visual and audio data. He methodically documented the facility's layout, security protocols, and communication systems, building a complete intelligence package that would be invaluable to resistance operations throughout the sector. After completing his legitimate maintenance work, Marcus began the real purpose of his visit. Using access codes he had acquired during months of careful observation and social engineering, he made his way to the facility's central data core. The chamber housed quantum processing units that managed intelligence operations across dozens of star systems, coordinating surveillance, analysis, and response activities for the Zephyrian military. Marcus connected a microscopic data tap to one of the processing units, a device so small that it was virtually undetectable. The tap would passively monitor communication traffic, copying and transmitting intelligence data to hidden relay stations throughout the resistance network. Within weeks, human forces would have access to real-time Zephyrian intelligence reports, tactical assessments, and operational plans. As he worked, Marcus reflected on the irony of his situation. The Zephyrians considered humans to be a minor threat, barely worth their attention, except as a source of occasional annoyance. Their military doctrine emphasized overwhelming force applied against conventional opponents, and their intelligence services focused on monitoring established criminal organizations and political dissidents. They had never developed effective countermeasures against an enemy that refused to play by conventional rules. Human resistance operations were decentralized, adaptive, and operated on principles that most Zephyrian commanders couldn't even comprehend. Instead of trying to match the Empire's military might, humanity had chosen to become invisible, infiltrating their enemy's society and turning their own systems against them. The data tap installation completed, Marcus made his way back through the facility's corridors. He nodded respectfully to the guards he encountered, filed his maintenance report with the appropriate department, and submitted his timesheet to the contractor management office. Everything about his visit appeared completely routine. As he passed through the final security checkpoint, the Zephyrian guard barely looked up from his monitoring station. Humans were so common throughout the galaxy, and so consistently unremarkable, that they had become part of the background noise of daily life. This one had completed his assigned maintenance work with typical human efficiency and would probably never be seen again. The warrior had no idea that he had just watched one of the most successful intelligence operatives in the galaxy walk away with enough classified information to compromise Zephyrian operations across 17 star systems. Marcus returned to the Prosperity's dream and resumed his cover identity as the ship's maintenance worker. Over the following days, as they traveled toward their next destination, he processed and analyzed the intelligence he had gathered. The quantum encryption protocols alone would provide the Resistance with years of operational advantage, allowing them to intercept and decode Zephyrian communications in real time. But the most valuable intelligence wasn't technical. It was psychological. Marcus had observed the Zephyrian intelligence service from the inside, and what he had seen confirmed his worst fears about humanity's situation in the galaxy. The Empire wasn't just militarily superior. They possessed a level of institutional competence and organizational efficiency that made them nearly impossible to defeat through conventional resistance operations. Their intelligence networks were vast and sophisticated. Their military coordination was flawless. Their economic resources were virtually unlimited. Under normal circumstances, any species that opposed them would be crushed within months. What saved humanity wasn't their technology or their numbers. It was the Zephyrians' inability to understand how their opponents thought. Every intelligence report Marcus had accessed made the same fundamental assumption. The human resistance operations were being coordinated by some form of central authority, following recognizable military or political objectives. The Zephyrians were constantly searching for human command centers, supply bases, and communication networks that could be targeted and destroyed. They couldn't comprehend that humanity had evolved beyond the need for centralized leadership. The Resistance operated like a living organism, with individual cells adapting to local conditions and opportunities. Orders didn't flow down from some hidden headquarters. Instead, operational plans emerged from the collective intelligence of thousands of individual operatives working toward common goals. Marcus himself exemplified this approach. His mission had been broadly defined by Resistance leadership, but the specific methods he used were entirely his own creation. He had spent 2 years building his cover identity, months developing his infiltration techniques, and weeks planning his penetration of the intelligence facility. No one had given him detailed instructions because no one else could have anticipated the exact opportunities that would arise. This decentralized approach made humanity incredibly difficult to defeat because there was no single point of failure. Destroying one resistance cell didn't compromise others. Capturing operational plans revealed only fragments of larger strategies. And eliminating key leaders simply resulted in new operatives stepping forward to take their place. The Zephyrians were fighting an enemy they couldn't see, understand, or effectively target. Every successful operation they conducted only revealed how little they actually knew about their opponents. As the Prosperity's dream approached its next destination, Marcus received an encrypted message through his hidden communication array. The transmission was brief and appeared to be routine shipping information, but embedded within the quantum encryption was intelligence that made his blood run cold. The Zephyrians were planning a major military operation designed to end human resistance permanently. Intelligence reports indicated that resistance activity had reached unacceptable levels, threatening the Empire's control over Outer Rim territories. The solution was comprehensive. Every human settlement, outpost, and hidden base would be systematically located and destroyed. The operation was codenamed Final Solution, and it was scheduled to begin in 6 weeks. Marcus stared at the message, processing its implications. The Zephyrians had finally decided that humanity posed enough of a threat to warrant complete extermination. Their patience with what they considered a persistent but minor problem had reached its end. They were about to discover why patient and methodical opponents were the most dangerous enemies of all. Marcus activated his communication array and began composing the most important message of his career. The intelligence he had gathered at Kepler Station would help the Resistance prepare for the coming storm, but preparation alone wouldn't be enough. Humanity needed to demonstrate that underestimating them had been the Empire's greatest mistake. Ghost Fox to Central Command, he transmitted. Priority Alpha. Package contains actionable intelligence on Zephyrian strategic operations. Recommend immediate activation of Prometheus Protocol. The enemy has revealed their hand. Time to show them ours. The response came within hours. Confirmed, Ghost Fox. Prometheus Protocol authorized. All field units are being notified. Prepare for Phase 3 operations. Marcus smiled grimly as he shut down the communication system. The Zephyrians thought they were dealing with a primitive species that could be eliminated through superior firepower and tactical coordination. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their courage. It was their ability to appear helpless right up until the moment they struck back. The Empire had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, but their reign of absolute power was about to face its greatest test. They had underestimated a quiet maintenance worker who fixed broken machines and kept his head down. Soon, they would discover that he was human and that humanity had been preparing for this moment since the first Zephyrian ship had appeared in human space all those years ago. The transformation began subtly, as all the most dangerous changes do. Across 17 star systems, in facilities that the Zephyrians considered completely secure, maintenance workers began making minor adjustments to critical systems. A pressure valve calibrated slightly differently here, a power routing protocol modified there, a communication relay programmed with new frequency parameters. Each change was small enough to pass unnoticed during routine inspections, legitimate enough to be explained by normal maintenance requirements. Marcus watched the operation unfold through secure channels as the Prosperity's dream continued its route through the Outer Rim territories. Every day brought new reports of successful infiltrations, intelligence-gathering operations, and system modifications. The resistance network that had spent years appearing scattered and ineffective was revealing itself to be far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The Prometheus Protocol was the culmination of a decade of careful planning. Every human who had taken a maintenance job, cleaning position, or food service role in Zephyrian facilities had been a potential operative. Every repair made to alien technology had been an opportunity to install hidden modifications. Every routine system upgrade had been a chance to insert human-designed software into enemy networks. For 10 years, humanity had been quietly transforming the Zephyrian Empire's infrastructure from within. Captain Vextar noticed the change in his maintenance worker first. Marcus had always been competent and reliable, but now there was something different about his demeanor. He moved through the ship with new confidence, and his routine repair work seemed to accomplish far more than should have been possible with the tools and parts at his disposal. Human, the Corellian called out one morning as Marcus emerged from the engine compartment. "I want to speak with you." Marcus set down his tools and approached the captain's position near the bridge access corridor. He maintained the respectful posture that had characterized his behavior for months, but Vextar could see something had changed in the human's eyes. There was an alertness there that hadn't been present before, an intelligence that seemed far more sophisticated than a simple maintenance worker should possess. "Yes, Captain. The ship's running better than it has in years," Vextar said, studying Marcus carefully. "Engine efficiency is up 17%, life support systems are operating at optimal parameters, and we haven't had a single equipment failure in 2 weeks. Either you've suddenly become the best mechanic in the galaxy, or you've been holding back on me." Marcus considered his response carefully. The time for complete invisibility was ending, but revealing too much too soon could compromise operations throughout the sector. He needed to calibrate his reply to maintain operational security while preparing the crew for what was coming. "I've been learning the ship's systems," he said finally, "understanding how everything works together. Sometimes problems that seem complicated have simple solutions if you know where to look." It was a truthful answer that revealed nothing about the sophisticated technical modifications he had been implementing throughout the vessel. Over the past months, Marcus had replaced dozens of standard components with enhanced versions of his own design. The ship's navigation system now included quantum encryption capabilities. The communications array could access frequency ranges that officially didn't exist. Even the food replicators have been modified to serve as emergency fabrication units, capable of producing advanced electronic components. The Prosperity's dream had been transformed from an aging cargo hauler into a state-of-the-art intelligence platform, and none of the crew suspected that their humble maintenance worker was responsible. "Well, keep doing whatever you're doing," Vextar said, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with Marcus's explanation. "We're making better time and spending less on repairs than we have since I bought this bucket." As the captain moved on to other duties, Marcus returned to his work. But he could feel the Corellian's eyes on him throughout the day, and he knew that maintaining his cover was becoming increasingly difficult. The enhanced capabilities he was installing in the ship were too sophisticated to hide indefinitely, and his growing confidence was making him stand out in ways that could prove dangerous. The solution came from an unexpected source. 2 days later, as the ship approached the Nexus gate that would carry them into the heavily patrolled core territories, long-range sensors detected a massive Zephyrian fleet movement. Dozens of warships were converging on strategic positions throughout the sector, taking up blockade positions around major population centers and transportation hubs. "What the hell is going on out there?" Vextar demanded as reports flooded in from other vessels in the area. Sylvan's crystalline fingers danced across her navigation console as she processed incoming data streams. "It looks like a major military operation," she reported, her usually composed voice tight with concern. "The Zephyrians are establishing interdiction fields around every human settlement in the sector." Marcus felt his pulse quicken as he accessed the ship's communication systems from his position in the maintenance section. The intelligence reports flowing through resistance channels painted a grim picture. Operation Final Solution had begun ahead of schedule, with Zephyrian forces moving to encircle human populations before beginning systematic extermination operations. "They're demanding that all vessels submit to enhanced security screening," Sylvan continued. "Any ship found to be carrying human passengers or crew will be impounded for investigation." The implications hit the crew immediately. As a mixed-species vessel operating in the Outer Rim, the Prosperity's dream was exactly the kind of ship that would receive intensive scrutiny. Even if they passed inspection, the delays would cost them weeks of revenue and potentially expose their smuggling operations to discovery. "Can we avoid the checkpoints?" Vextar asked. "Not without deviating so far off course that we'll miss our delivery windows," the navigator replied. "And if we're caught trying to evade inspection, they'll assume we're carrying contraband." Marcus made his decision. The time for hiding had ended. "There's another option," he said, emerging from the maintenance section. The entire crew turned to look at him, surprised by his unexpected participation in what had been a command-level discussion. Marcus had never offered opinions on navigation or tactical matters before, preferring to focus solely on his maintenance duties. "What kind of option?" Vextar demanded. "I can modify our sensor signature to make the ship appear to be something else," Marcus replied. "Change our engine emissions, alter our hull configuration readings, maybe even adjust our mass distribution pattern. Make it look like we're a different class of vessel entirely." Sylvan stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible. The modifications required would take weeks of work in a fully equipped shipyard. You'd need specialized equipment, advanced programming capabilities, and detailed knowledge of Zephyrian sensor technology." Marcus met her gaze calmly. "I have all of those things." The silence that followed was profound. Even the Brackery cargo handlers stopped their work to stare at the human maintenance worker who had just claimed he could accomplish something that should have been impossible with the resources available aboard their vessel. "Explain," Vextar commanded, his forearms crossing in a gesture that conveyed both skepticism and dangerous curiosity. "Over the past months, I've been upgrading the ship's systems," Marcus said, choosing his words carefully. "Installing new components, replacing outdated technology, improving operational efficiency. The modifications I've made include enhanced sensor arrays, upgraded processing units, and sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities." He paused, watching as understanding began to dawn on the faces around him. The truth is, this ship is capable of far more than you realize. And I'm not exactly the simple maintenance worker you hired 6 months ago. Captain Vextar's expression shifted from confusion to suspicion to something approaching alarm. His hands moved unconsciously toward the weapon he carried, a survival instinct developed during decades of operating in dangerous territories. "What are you saying?" he asked quietly. "I'm saying that I can get us through the Zephyrian checkpoints," Marcus replied. "But doing so will reveal capabilities that might change how you think about humans in general, and me in particular." The crew exchanged glances, each processing the implications in their own way. Sylvan's crystalline features reflected complex calculations as she considered the technical feasibility of what Marcus was proposing. The Brackery workers looked confused, but hopeful, understanding enough to realize that their employment and possibly their lives depended on evading Zephyrian scrutiny. Vextar studied Marcus for a long moment, his predator's instincts evaluating the human with new attention. Whatever else Marcus might be hiding, the Corellian had seen enough of his work to know that the human's technical capabilities were far beyond anything he had initially claimed. "Do it," the captain said finally. "But understand that once we're through this, you and I are going to have a very detailed conversation about who you really are and what you're doing on my ship." Marcus nodded. Understood. He returned to the maintenance section and began activating systems he had spent months installing throughout the vessel. Hidden processing units came online, drawing power from sources that hadn't existed in the ship's original design. Quantum field generators began altering the vessel's energy signature, while holographic projectors created false hull configurations that would fool even sophisticated sensor arrays. Within hours, the Prosperity's dream had transformed from a battered cargo hauler into what appeared to be a Zeltharian diplomatic courier, complete with false credentials and a fabricated mission that would allow them to pass through Zephyrian checkpoints without extensive inspection. As they approached the first security station, Marcus monitored the process through sensors he had integrated throughout the ship. Zephyrian scanning systems examined their vessel, cross-referenced their identity against official databases, and confirmed their authorization to pass through the checkpoint. The deception was perfect because Marcus had spent years learning how to make it so. Every component he had installed was based on technology acquired through resistance intelligence operations. Every false credential was supported by data infiltrated into Zephyrian administrative systems. Even the ship's apparent crew manifest had been altered to show Zeltharian diplomats instead of the mixed-species smugglers actually aboard. They passed through 3 more checkpoints without incident, each one confirming their false identity and waving them through to continue their supposed diplomatic mission. As they cleared the final inspection point and resumed course for their actual destination, Marcus finally allowed himself to relax. The operation had been a complete success, but it had also irrevocably changed his relationship with the crew. He was no longer an invisible maintenance worker who could blend into the background. His technical capabilities had been demonstrated in ways that made it impossible to maintain his previous cover identity. More importantly, the Zephyrian military operation was proceeding exactly as Resistance intelligence had predicted. The Empire was committing massive resources to what they believed would be the final elimination of human resistance. They were positioning their forces for maximum intimidation effect, confident that overwhelming displays of military might would crush any thoughts of rebellion. They had no idea that they were walking into a trap 10 years in the making. As the ship continued toward its destination, Marcus began receiving status reports from resistance cells throughout the sector. The modifications he and thousands of other operatives had spent years installing in Zephyrian infrastructure were being activated. Communication networks were being infiltrated. Security systems were being compromised. Even the warships conducting the blockade operations were unknowingly carrying human-designed components that could be turned against them at the appropriate moment. The Empire had finally decided to deal with the human problem permanently. They were about to discover that humans had been preparing for this moment since their first encounter with Zephyrian forces, and that their patient, methodical approach to warfare was far more dangerous than any conventional military threat the Empire had ever faced. The quiet maintenance worker who had spent months being ignored and underestimated was about to show them what humanity was truly capable of when it stopped pretending to be harmless. The revelation came at 0347 hours, Galactic Standard Time, when every Zephyrian military installation in 17 star systems simultaneously lost primary communications. Admiral Kethvar, commanding the Final Solution fleet from his flagship Inevitable Victory, was reviewing deployment status when his communications officer reported the first anomalies. Minor static on subspace channels, brief delays in data transmission, intermittent failures in quantum encryption protocols. The problems appear to be random technical glitches, the kind of minor malfunctions that plagued even the most sophisticated military systems. Within 30 minutes, random glitches had become systematic failures. Admiral, his chief of operations, reported, her 4 hands working frantically at her control station, were experiencing cascading communication failures throughout the fleet. Primary channels are down, backup systems are showing massive interference, and our quantum relay network appears to have suffered complete protocol corruption. Kethvar's scarred features remained calm as he processed this information. In 40 years of military service, he had learned that technological failures were inevitable during large-scale operations. The solution was always the same: fall back on redundant systems and maintain operational momentum while technical staff resolve the problems. Switch to emergency communication protocols, he commanded. All ships are to maintain position and continue operations using local tactical networks. Sir, the communications officer interrupted, his voice carrying a note of panic that was unusual for a veteran Zephyrian warrior. Emergency protocols are also failing. It appears that our entire communication infrastructure has been compromised. The silence that followed was profound. For the first time in his distinguished career, Admiral Kethvar found himself commanding a massive military operation with no way to coordinate his forces or communicate with high command. Across the fleet, individual ship commanders were reaching the same terrifying conclusion. The sophisticated communication networks that allowed the Zephyrian Empire to coordinate military operations across vast distances had suddenly and inexplicably ceased to function. Without the ability to receive orders, share intelligence, or call for support, the most powerful military force in the galaxy had been reduced to a collection of isolated warships operating blind. What they didn't know was that every communication failure had been precisely planned and executed by human operatives working within their own systems. Aboard the Prosperity's Dream, Marcus monitored the operation's progress through hidden sensors and encrypted resistance communications. The first phase of humanity's response to Final Solution was proceeding exactly as designed. 10 years of patient infiltration and system modification were paying dividends that exceeded even the most optimistic projections. "What's happening out there?" Captain Vextar demanded as reports of the communication blackout reached civilian channels. Marcus looked up from his console, where he had been tracking the systematic collapse of Zephyrian military coordination throughout the sector. His expression was calm, but his eyes held a coldness that the crew had never seen before. "The Zephyrians are learning that underestimating humans was a mistake," he said simply. Before anyone could respond, Marcus activated a hidden communication array that transformed the ship's main view screen into a display showing tactical information from across 17 star systems. The data revealed the positions of Zephyrian fleets, the status of their communication networks, and the real-time progress of resistance operations that were unfolding on a scale that none of the crew had imagined possible. "Impossible," Sylvan whispered, her crystalline features reflecting the complex data streams flowing across the screen. This level of intelligence gathering and coordination would require years of preparation and resources that no resistance movement could possibly possess. "You're right," Marcus agreed. No resistance movement could accomplish this. But humanity isn't a resistance movement. We're something else entirely. He manipulated the display to show a broader tactical picture, revealing the true scope of what was happening. In addition to the communication blackouts, Zephyrian forces were experiencing systematic failures in their navigation systems, weapons targeting computers, and life support networks. Ships that had been perfectly functional hours earlier were now struggling with cascade failures that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Every major Zephyrian installation in 17 star systems is currently experiencing what they believe to be random technical failures, Marcus explained, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had intimate knowledge of the operation. In reality, we've been modifying their systems for years, installing hidden subroutines that could be activated when we needed them. The implications began sinking in for the crew. The quiet human maintenance worker they had barely noticed for 6 months was describing a level of coordination and technical sophistication that challenged everything they thought they knew about the balance of power in the galaxy. "Who is we?" Vextar asked, though his expression suggested he was beginning to understand the answer. "Humanity," Marcus replied. "All of it. Every human working in Zephyrian facilities. Every maintenance worker, custodian, food service employee, and technical contractor. We've been preparing for this moment since the first Zephyrian ship appeared in human space." He activated another display that showed the deployment patterns of human operatives throughout Zephyrian space. The map revealed thousands of positions, each one representing an individual who had spent years building cover identities while secretly modifying alien technology and gathering intelligence. "The Zephyrians never saw us as a threat because they couldn't understand how we think," Marcus continued. "They expected us to fight like they do, with massive fleets and conventional tactics. Instead, we became invisible and turned their own systems against them." The tactical display updated to show the current status of Zephyrian forces. Without functioning communications, their carefully coordinated blockade operations were dissolving into chaos. Individual ship commanders were making independent decisions, some maintaining position, while others attempted to withdraw to positions where they could re-establish contact with their superiors. "This is just the beginning," Marcus said, his fingers moving across controls that accessed resistance communication networks spanning multiple sectors. Phase 1 was about isolating their forces. Phase 2 is about demonstrating why they should have left us alone. As if summoned by his words, new contacts began appearing on the tactical display. Ships emerged from hyperspace at locations throughout the sector, their signatures identifying them as vessels from dozens of different species and organizations. Some were obvious military craft, but others appeared to be converted cargo haulers, mining vessels, and even civilian transports. "What are those?" Sylvan asked, her voice tight with amazement. "Everyone the Zephyrians have oppressed over the past 1,000 years," Marcus replied. "Species that were conquered, enslaved, or exterminated. Survivors who have been waiting for an opportunity to strike back. We spent the past decade making contact with them, sharing technology, and coordinating a response that the Empire never saw coming." The display showed the approaching fleets taking positions around isolated Zephyrian forces. The warships that had been deployed to crush human resistance were now finding themselves surrounded by enemies they couldn't communicate with their superiors to warn about. Admiral Kethvar stared at his tactical display in growing horror as enemy contacts multiplied around his fleet's position. Without functioning communications, he had no way to call for reinforcements or coordinate with other Zephyrian forces in the area. His ships were powerful, but they had been positioned for blockade operations, not fleet combat against multiple opponents. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we're receiving transmission from the lead enemy vessel." "Put it through." The main screen activated to reveal a being that Kethvar had never seen before. The creature appeared to be humanoid, but with characteristics suggesting genetic modification or cybernetic enhancement. When it spoke, its voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Admiral Kethvar," the being said, "I am Commander Sarachon of the Human Liberation Fleet. You are surrounded and cut off from support. I'm offering you one opportunity to surrender your forces and withdraw from this sector." Kethvar's scarred features twisted into a snarl of contempt. "I am a warrior of the Zephyrian Empire. We do not surrender to primitive species and their desperate allies. I was hoping you would say that, Chen replied with a smile that carried no warmth whatsoever. It will make what happens next much more satisfying. The transmission ended, and Kethvar immediately ordered his ships to prepare for combat. Whatever technological advantages the humans might have achieved, they were still facing the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Zephyrian warships were nearly indestructible. Their weapons could devastate entire fleets, and their warriors had never known defeat in conventional combat. The first indication that this would not be conventional combat came when his flagship's weapon systems refused to activate. "Sir," his weapons officer reported, panic clear in her voice, "primary batteries are not responding. Backup systems show critical failures throughout the targeting matrix. It appears that our weapons control networks have been compromised." Before Kethvar could respond, similar reports flooded in from throughout his fleet. Ships that had been perfectly functional minutes earlier were now discovering that their weapons, shields, and maneuvering systems were failing in ways that suggested deliberate sabotage rather than random mechanical problems. "How is this possible?" Kethvar demanded. His chief technical officer, a veteran of 100 campaigns, studied the diagnostic reports with growing disbelief. "Sir, it appears that critical components throughout our systems have been replaced with modified versions that include hidden control protocols. Someone has had access to our ships at the component level for an extended period." The truth hit Kethvar like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just infiltrated Zephyrian communication networks. They had been systematically modifying the Empire's military hardware for years, installing hidden vulnerabilities that could be exploited at the moment of their choosing. As this realization sank in, the human fleet opened fire. The weapons that struck the Zephyrian ships were unlike anything in the Empire's tactical databases. Instead of conventional energy beams or projectile weapons, the humans deployed sophisticated electromagnetic pulse devices that specifically targeted the modified components their operatives had installed throughout Zephyrian military hardware. Ships that should have been able to withstand direct hits from antimatter warheads found their systems cascading into failure as the human weapons activated hidden subroutines embedded in their own technology. Shields collapsed, engines shut down, and life support systems began operating at minimum levels. Within minutes, the most powerful battle fleet in Zephyrian history had been reduced to helpless hulks drifting in space. Aboard the Prosperity's Dream, Marcus watched the engagement with grim satisfaction. The tactical display showed similar scenes playing out throughout the sector as Zephyrian forces discovered that their technological superiority had been turned against them. "How long have you been planning this?" Captain Vextar asked, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and concern. "Since the first human colony was destroyed," Marcus replied. "We learned early that we couldn't match Zephyrian military power through conventional means. So we developed a different approach. We became indispensable to their society while secretly preparing for the day when they would push us too far." The display showed the final phase of the operation beginning as human assault teams began boarding disabled Zephyrian vessels. The warriors who had seemed invincible hours earlier were now prisoners of war, their empire's expansion plans reduced to scattered remnants of isolated forces. "What happens now?" Sylvain asked. Marcus considered the question carefully. The successful execution of Operation Prometheus had fundamentally changed the balance of power in the galaxy, but it was only the beginning of a larger transformation. "Now we rebuild," he said. "The Zephyrian Empire's reign of absolute power is over. It's time to create something better." As reports continued flooding in from resistance cells throughout the galaxy, Marcus began composing the message that would change the course of galactic history. The quiet maintenance worker who had been underestimated and ignored was about to announce humanity's emergence as a major power in the galaxy. The age of Zephyrian domination was ending, and the age of human ingenuity was about to begin.